Hello, my name is Amy Day, and I'm going to be presenting my final presentation, 10 learning disabilities or disorders that may affect the students in your classroom and how to accommodate for them. A study done by the National Center for Educational Statistics determined that in the 2021-2022 school year, 15% of all public school students were identified as needing special education or related services and were eligible to receive IDEA services. About 95% of those students were enrolled in regular schools. And out of those 95%, 67% of those students enrolled in regular schools spend 80% or more of their day in a regular classroom. So I want us to talk about how important it is for us to be able to accommodate for these students. The first disability that we're going to talk about is dyslexia. And there are some telltale signs of a student having dyslexia. And some of the signs may include reading well below grade level, difficulty with spelling words, mistaking letters B and D, P and Q, W and M, writing words backwards, avoiding reading in class, and needing to repeat the reading to understand the text for comprehension. Now let's talk about some ways that we could accommodate that in each of our classes. You could provide color strips or bookmarks to help focus on a line of text when reading, so students can see how to write correctly. You could use letter and number strips. Large print text is always good. Allow students to read text multiple times during the day. You could read written instructions out loud, give them step-by-step instructions out loud and written. Allow different ways to respond, like circling answers instead of writing the word out. We could arrange problems on tests from easiest to hardest, and we could allow extra time for students to accomplish their work. Our next disability that we're going to talk about is dysgraphia, and some telltale signs of that is avoiding written work, producing only a few words or sentences at a time when other people's are completing many paragraphs. You might see illegible handwriting, incorrect use of upper and lowercase letters. Basic written activities such as note-taking are challenging as they require simultaneous listening. Letters or sounds that are too similar are confused, like jumped with a T instead of an ED. And let's look at some accommodations that we can use to help these students. Pencil grips to help with formation. Handouts so that there is less to copy from the board. An audio recorder or a tablet in the classroom. Paper with different colored or raised lines to help for letters in the right spaces. Graph paper to help line up math problems. Paper with name and date already filled in on it. Examples of finished assignments. That always helps me, and I don't have dysgraphia. Circle the answer or fill in the blank questions. Adapting our tests so that they don't have to fill in blanks. We know that they know the content if they can just circle the answer. So helping them to just be able to circle it is always a good thing. And allowing them to use speech to text with a device instead of writing everything down. Let's talk about dyscalculia. That would be characterized by difficulty reading clocks, counting money, identifying patterns, remembering math facts, and solving mental math. You might see students counting with their fingers, problems differentiating between their right and their left, no alignments of digits on their papers, major impairment in solving more complex arithmetic problems, and rapid retrieval of number facts. And let's look at some ways that we can accommodate for these students. We could provide graph paper to help students line up math problems. We could allow or teach students how to self-talk through problems, teaching them those steps, helping them to talk through it. Allow students to write out charts and sketches to help them solve problems. You could give them a list of math formulas that have been taught. We could provide manipulatives such as counters or clocks. Separate word problems and number problems on separate sheets of paper. We could teach the students step-by-step problems and then have them repeat them back to us so that we ensure that they do understand them. We could hang multiplication and division charts on the wall, or allow students to use calculators when not assessing for computations. Auditory processing disorder. It's characterized by having trouble understanding speech in the presence of competing background noise. Inability to localize the source of a signal. Difficulty following rapid speech. Frequent requests for repetition or rephrasing of information. And difficulty or inability to detect the humor or sarcasm made by subtle changes in the intonation of your voice. Let's talk about some accommodations. We need to make sure that we provide quiet areas for independent work time. We need to make sure that their seating is close to the teacher and away from noisy areas to make sure that it's easier to distinguish the teacher's voice. We need to check in frequently, making sure that they understand. We need to provide assistive listening devices if possible. We could create nonverbal cues to show that a key point is being made and they know that they need to really, really hone in and pay attention at this time. Make sure that you're speaking loud and clear. We could give materials of new concepts to these students before it's taught in class. So we could give them the material to look over the night before so that as they're listening, they know what they're listening for. And we could also give students an outline of the lesson. And we want to make sure that we grade these students based on completion of goals. Visual processing disorder. Difficulty learning to tie shoelaces may be a characteristic of this one. May put more pressure on a pencil to control motor movement and experience fatigue. Turns head while reading or holds paper up close to one eye or at an odd angle while they're reading. Loses their place often while they're reading, or has difficulty navigating around school or campus. Maybe even you notice that out on the football field, they can't read the scoreboard. Let's look at how we can modify or accommodate. We could use reading guide strips or blank index cards to block out other lines of text while reading. We could provide highlighters to use to highlight information while reading. We could allow students to use audiobooks. We could provide a copy of class notes, or we could have a student that they're close to take notes for them and then allow them to use those notes. We want to make sure that we are clearly spacing words and problems on a page. Write directions in different colors from the rest of the assignment. Maybe you put your directions in dark blue and then the rest of your assignment in a gray. Allow oral reporting instead of written responses. We could reduce visual distractions by folding a test in half before we give it to them. And then we can provide some extra time for their tests and assignments. Autism is one disorder that has many faces But some of the characteristics could include trouble developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships, repetitive patterns of behaviors or interests, repetitive motor movements such as lining up cars or flipping objects, inflexible adherence to routines, indifference to pain or temperature, an adverse response to specific sounds or textures. Let's look at how we can accommodate for some of these things. We can provide a visual schedule of the day so that they can be prepared for what's coming. It could even include pictures or symbols that help represent different activities throughout the day. We could provide quiet spaces so that they can get breaks from overstimulation and social interactions. We need to give them some positive reinforcement to motivate them to finish their tasks. Can give them mentors to help provide support and guidance, peer mentors, those that are in their class. Give them some social skill training to improve their communication and social interactions. We can allow them to have noise canceling headphones to block out distractions and noises and to help them keep them focused. We could give them some assistive technology like speech to text devices or digital organizers. And then we need to make sure that we give them some breaks in between activities to help reduce anxiety. Let's look at ADHD. This is probably the one that we hear most about in our classrooms today. It's overdiagnosed for some and underdiagnosed for some as well. It can be characterized as making careless mistakes, struggling to follow through on instructions, loses things, is easily distracted, squirms and fidgets in their seat, acts as if they are driven by a motor, and may blurt out answers even though we have given them instructions not to do so. Let's look at some accommodations that we can do to help these children. We can allow for flexible seating, like cushions in the seats that may move around a little bit. Give them some wiggle room, if you will. Maybe give them some resistance bands on their chair legs. We know that these students need to move, and so anytime we can allow them to move without making noises and moving to distract other students, those would be good ways to keep them moving. We can allow them to stand at their desks or sit in the floor with a lapboard if that's how they study best. We need to designate a quiet workspace in the classroom. We need to make sure that these students are seated close to the teacher and away from high traffic areas that will distract them. We could provide notes or an outline of the lesson for them. When we give directions, we can give them orally and written, and then we can have the student to repeat them so that we know that they're with us and they're understanding those things. We can differentiate the ways that we understand, allow understanding to be presented in different ways, like oral reports instead of tests and quizzes. We can minimize the number of questions or problems on each worksheet or test. We want to make sure that we grade for content, not necessarily neatness. And we can allow these students to have a little extra time on their tests and assignments. Let's look at oppositional defiance disorder. These students you may find in your classroom could present with hostility. They would be defiant towards authority figures. They would seem to be irritable. They would lose their temper easily. They might say mean and spiteful words towards other people. Let's look at some ways that we can accommodate. We want to make sure that the rules that we give them are clear and predictable. And we want to make sure that they are administered fairly and consistently. Make sure that academic work is on the student's instructional level. We don't want to give them things that are too difficult or too easy. Offer students chosen rewards for non-desirable academic tasks. This is not to bend to the child's desires. This is to show the students that we care about them and we care about their wants also. I've always lived by the fact that to give respect, to get respect, you should give respect. And I feel like that goes along with children's too. They want to feel respected. And so sometimes we can help alleviate some things by allowing them to choose their rewards if they're giving us the desirable behaviors. We want to keep these students busy. We don't want to give them idle time to get distracted and to get into trouble. And we want to encourage positive social interactions to and from other students. We don't want to let these children be selected last for a team. Sometimes these children isolate themselves by their behaviors, but we do want to still encourage the other students to treat them fairly. This can help them to see that when they behave well, others want to have them on their team. So we want to make sure that they're not last picked and they don't go without a partner for projects. Let's look at anxiety. There are multiple forms of anxiety, such as separation anxiety, and that's where younger students and maybe even some older students are afraid when their parents are away from them. We've got some students with phobias. That would be characterized as extreme fear about specific things or situations. Social anxiety, afraid of places where people are or a lot of people. Sometimes a student might be okay in a classroom with 10 to 15, but when they go to the lunchroom where there's 50, 60, 100 kids, they can have some anxiety about that. Some students might be worried about the future or bad things happening to them. And some of the physical characteristics of this we might see are maybe heart pounding, dizziness, shakiness. Let's look at some things that we can do to help these students and accommodate them. We could provide some designated calm down areas for when students are overwhelmed. We could give designated and needed breaks throughout the day. Students who suffer from anxiety tend to miss extra mental health days and will need help with getting makeup work completed. Maybe we can allow these students to leave class 3 to 5 minutes early so that they're not overwhelmed during class change with a bunch of other students in the hallway. We could chunk large assignments into smaller ones, or if you were giving your students 2 sheets of paper that they're working on, maybe just give them one, and then once they've finished that one, give them the other one to work on. And we could also give these students a little extra time to work on their assignments. And finally, let's talk about PTSD. We often think about PTSD as a disorder that we might see in older people or people who've been in the military. But sometimes our students could have PTSD over some situations. And let's look at some symptoms that you might observe with these students. Reliving the event over and over in thought or play. Very upset when something causes memories of the event. Intense ongoing fear or sadness. Irritability and angry outbursts. Constantly looking for possible threats, or avoiding people or places that they associate with the event that caused this kind of trauma to them. Let's look at some ways that we can accommodate. These students may need some extra visits to counselors or other support staff during the day. So we need to kind of be flexible with class time. These students need us to listen to them, to hear what they're saying. They need some healing to take place, and they've been placed in our care. So that is our responsibility to give that to them. Sometimes, though, they may want to talk for a long time, and you might have to tell them that you only have a certain amount of time, and then you have to get back to your work, and then you can get back to them at a break time or at lunchtime or right before dismissal of school, so that you can still hear them out, but you're not neglecting your other students in your classroom. These students will likely need a little extra time and help on assignments. If they've gone through a traumatic experience, it's hard to get away from that experience to work on their schoolwork. I had a student who lost her mother, a first grade student who lost her mother in the middle of the school year, and that was very difficult for her and her family, and it was hard to see her going through that. And so I had to understand that there were moments where she was not going to be able to keep up with what we were doing in class, and she needed some extra support. So always be willing to give them that extra time and that extra help on those assignments to show them that you're there for them. All right, so let's talk about the social responsibility. The number of students with learning disabilities and disorders continues to rise every year. It is the responsibility of each teacher and administrator to give each child the greatest chance at success that is possible. Let's look at our commitment. With just a little research and determination, we can make educational goals attainable for each child in our classroom. Let's look at some reflective practice. Below is an excellent website that exhibits a plethora of knowledge about learning disabilities and disorders and accommodations that can be made for each of these. I found this website to be amazing. It has many other tabs that you can click on and go into other disorders and a lot of accommodations that I haven't mentioned here in this presentation. Let's look at integrity. Please keep in mind that the diagnoses of learning disabilities and disorders are to be kept confidential. They should only be discussed with other professionals and for the purpose of giving or gaining support of your students. And then professionalism. New and developing ways of helping students with learning disabilities and disorders are created every day. Teachers should research this topic often and make sure that they are up to date with the newest accommodations. And here are my resources that I pulled all of these studies from. So if you'd like to, you can check some of these out for yourself. They were tremendous assets to this presentation. Thank you.